Getting the concrete slab off her was harder than Derek had expected. The thing was massive and the angle was all wrong. He had to brace his feet against a smaller piece of debris and use his whole body weight to get any leverage at all. "This is going to hurt," he warned, gripping the edge of the concrete. The woman just stared at him, golden eyes unreadable. She was preparing herself, Derek realized, getting ready for the pain that was about to come. Derek took a deep breath and pushed. The concrete groaned in protest, centuries of weight and pressure making it reluctant to move. His muscles strained. His back screamed and sweat broke out across his forehead despite the cool air. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the slab began to shift. The woman's whole body went rigid as the concrete moved, putting pressure on parts of her that had been numb for who knew how long. Blood flow returned to crushed limbs, and Derek could see the agony written across her face. But she didn't cry out. She didn't even whimper. She just gritted her teeth and endured it. With a final grinding sound, the concrete rolled away. The woman's leg came free, and Derek could see immediately that it was badly injured. Her left leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, possibly broken. Deep gashes ran along her ribs, still bleeding sluggishly. Bruises covered her arms and face like a map of violence. "Don't move too fast," Derek warned, stepping closer. "Your body's been compressed for hours. Moving too quickly could cause more damage." The woman's breathing was unsteady, her whole body trembling from shock and pain. She still didn't trust him. That much was obvious from the way she watched his every movement. But she didn't resist when he slid an arm under her shoulders, carefully supporting her weight up close. Derek could see the full extent of her injuries. The gash along her ribs was deep, probably needing stitches. Her leg was definitely broken, maybe in multiple places. If she didn't get medical attention soon, she wouldn't survive the night. "Come on," Derek murmured, adjusting his grip as he lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he'd expected, probably from blood loss and dehydration. Her body tensed at the contact, sharp claws pressing lightly against his shoulder, not deep enough to wound, but enough to remind him that she wasn't defenseless. Derek couldn't help but smirk. "Relax, princess. If I wanted you dead, I'd have left that beam where it was." The woman let out a weak growl, something that might have been a threat in her own language, that she didn't resist. Instead, her head slumped slightly against his chest, her breathing shallow but steady. Derek took one last look at the ruins around them. He was breaking every rule in the book. If his commanding officers found out he'd helped the enemy, saved one of them, there would be serious consequences. Court-martial, maybe even execution for treason. But right now, there was only one thing that mattered: getting her somewhere, safe. With the weight of an alien enemy in his arms and the ruins of war behind him, Derek carried her away into the growing darkness. The silence was the worst part. Not the twisted metal or the burnt buildings or even the smell of death that hung in the air like a thick blanket. No, it was the complete and total silence that made Derek Kane's skin crawl as he moved through what used to be a thriving city. His boots crunched softly on broken glass. Each step echoed off the hollow shells of buildings that reached toward the grey sky like broken fingers. The rifle in his hands felt heavier than usual, though he'd carried it through dozens of missions just like this one. Maybe it was the weight of knowing what he'd find here, or what he wouldn't find. Derek paused at the corner of what might have been a marketplace once. Colourful fabric still clung to some of the stalls, now faded and torn by wind and rain. A child's toy lay half buried in the rubble, something bright and cheerful that didn't belong in this graveyard. The war had been going on for 3 years now. 3 long, bloody years since the alliance between humans and the Zak had fallen apart. Derek remembered when they'd been partners, exploring the stars together, sharing technology and dreams of a peaceful future. That felt like a lifetime ago. Trust was a fragile thing. Derek had learned. It could be built over years and destroyed in minutes. One betrayal, one broken promise, one moment of greed or fear, and suddenly your allies became your enemies. Now, there was nothing left between humans and the Zak but hatred and the smoking ruins of worlds, caught in between. Derek's mission was simple enough on paper. Scout the remains of the former Zak colony, confirm there were no survivors, and report back to command. Clean and quick, no complications. But Derek had been a soldier long enough to know that missions were never as simple as they seemed on paper. The metallic taste of burnt circuits filled his mouth as he breathed. Smoke still rose from some of the larger buildings. Thin grey streams that twisted up toward the clouds. The bombing had been thorough. His own people had made sure of that. No half measures, no mercy. When humans decided to end something, they ended it completely. Derek checked his watch. He'd been walking for 2 hours already, and the city seemed to stretch on forever. Block after block of destruction, street after street of empty windows, staring down at him like dead eyes. His orders were to cover the main sectors, document what he found, and be back at the extraction point by nightfall. He was about to turn down another street when he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it over the distant crackling of still-burning fires. Derek froze, his finger finding the trigger of his rifle automatically. In places like this, any sound could mean danger. There it was again. A soft intake of breath, pained and desperate. Human? No, something about it was different. The rhythm was wrong. Too quick, too shallow. Derek's pulse quickened as he realized what he was hearing. Someone was still alive in this wasteland. Moving carefully, Derek followed the sound. His training kicked in. Silent steps, eyes scanning for threats, rifle ready, but not yet aimed. He'd learned long ago that fear could make people do stupid things, and a wounded survivor might lash out at anyone who approached. The sound led him deeper into the ruins of what looked like a transport hub. The architecture was distinctly Zak, all flowing curves and organic shapes that seemed to grow from the ground rather than being built on top of it. Most of it had collapsed, but parts of the structure still stood, creating a maze of twisted metal and broken stone. Derek picked his way through the debris, following the sound of labored breathing. His heart was beating faster now, though he wasn't sure if it was from excitement at finding a survivor or fear of what he might find. In his experience, the people who survived disasters like this were often the most dangerous. They'd do anything to stay alive. A piece of rubble shifted under his foot, and the breathing stopped. Derek cursed silently, freezing in place. He'd given himself away. For a long moment there was nothing but silence. Then, slowly, the breathing resumed, quicker now, more panicked. Derek rounded a fallen support beam and saw her. She was pinned beneath a massive slab of concrete, her body half buried in dust and debris. At first glance, she looked almost human. The same basic shape, the same desperate struggle for life. But her skin was a deep, shimmering blue, like the ocean at twilight. Her hair was silver white, matted with blood and dirt, but still catching what little light filtered through the ruins. And her eyes, golden eyes that burned with pain and fury. As they locked onto his dot, she was Zak, the enemy. The people he'd been fighting for 3 years. The ones who'd betrayed humanity's trust and started this war. Derek's finger tightened on the trigger of his rifle automatically, years of training and conditioning taking over. But she wasn't fighting. She couldn't fight. The concrete slab across her lower body was enormous, probably weighing several tons. Blood seeped from cuts on her arms and face, and her breathing was shallow and uneven. She was dying, slowly and painfully. Derek should have shot her. It would have been the smart thing to do, the safe thing. His orders were clear. No survivors. No exceptions. The Zak were dangerous, even when they appeared helpless. Especially when they appeared helpless. Instead, Derek found himself lowering his rifle slightly. The Zak woman's eyes tracked the movement, confusion flickering across her face. She'd expected to die the moment he saw her. Hell, she probably wanted to die rather than be captured by a human soldier. "You're alive," Derek said, his voice sounding strange in the silence. The woman's breath caught. She tried to push herself up, muscles straining against the weight holding her down. A sharp gasp of pain escaped her lips as her arms buckled, and she fell back against the rubble. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, and Derek could see the exhaustion in every line of her body. "If you could fight, you'd already be on your feet," Derek observed, crouching down but keeping his distance. The woman's eyes never left his face, watching for any sign of aggression. "I can get that beam off you, patch you up, or I can walk away and let you take your chances with the scavengers. Your choice." The woman's golden eyes flickered with something that might have been surprise. Her claws. Derek noticed she had claws instead of fingernails, dug weakly into the ground beneath her. She was thinking, weighing her options. She wasn't stupid. She knew how this would end if he left her here. Seconds stretched between them, heavy with tension. Derek could hear his own heartbeat, could smell the dust and blood and burnt metal that filled the air. This was a crossroads moment, he realized. Whatever happened next would change everything. Finally, slowly, the woman gave a barely visible nod. Derek exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "All right. Try not to bite me." The storm hit without warning, the way they always did in this part of the system. One moment the sky was clear, the next it was filled with churning black clouds that seemed to swallow the light. Lightning split the darkness in jagged streaks, illuminating the destroyed city in brief, harsh flashes. Derek had found shelter in what used to be a storage facility. Half the roof had collapsed, but the walls still held, and it was better than being caught in the open. He sat near the entrance, his rifle balanced on his knee, watching the darkness settle in around them. The storm would help them, he knew. The rain would wash away their tracks. The thunder would cover the sound of their movement. But storms also brought other things, dangerous things that hunted in the dark. Behind him, the Zak woman stirred. She'd been unconscious for most of the journey here, barely aware enough to drink the water he'd forced between her lips. Now she let out a low groan, shifting against the blanket he'd laid beneath her. "You alive?" Derek asked without turning around. A weak, irritated growl answered him. "Barely." Her voice was hoarse, edged with pain, but there was strength behind it. "Good." He wasn't about to carry dead weight through hostile territory. "You've had worse, I bet," Derek said, standing and moving to check the makeshift bandages around her ribs. She tensed under his touch, golden eyes narrowing in warning. Her claws twitched at her sides, though she was too weak to make good on any threats. "You should have left me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Derek smirked. "Yeah, probably." He tightened the last bandage and pulled away before she could decide she hated him enough to stab him. The shelter wasn't much, just 4 walls and part of a roof. The walls were scorched from past battles, and holes in the concrete let in drafts of cold air. But it was dry and it was hidden, and that was good enough for now. Derek had a feeling they wouldn't be alone for long. And he was right. The first sign came as a change in the storm. The wind died down. The rain lessened. And suddenly there was a silence that felt wrong. Derek's gut twisted. He'd spent enough time in war zones to recognize the unnatural stillness that came before an ambush. He grabbed his rifle and moved toward the entrance, scanning the darkness beyond. The rain was still falling, but lighter now, pattering against the broken concrete. Through it, he could hear something else. Heavy footsteps. The soft clicking sounds that Zach made when they were trying to be quiet. Shit, Derek muttered. Woman, he still didn't know her name. Must have heard it too. Despite her injuries, she forced herself upright, bracing against the wall. Who is it? Trouble, Derek said, pulling his rifle to his shoulder. Stay down. The first shot came from the shadows. A bright blue plasma bolt that seared through the rain and slammed into the wall beside Derek's head. Chunks of concrete exploded outward, one piece cutting his cheek. Derek dropped to one knee, returning. Fire before the attackers could close in. The blue-white glow of Zach weapons cut through the storm, outlining their figures as they moved between the ruins. Derek counted at least 3 of them, maybe 4. They weren't just random scavengers looking for supplies. These were hunters, moving with purpose and coordination. Another shot tore through the space where Derek had been standing a second ago. He fired back, his bullet catching one of the attackers in the shoulder. The alien stumbled but didn't go down. These weren't ordinary Zach civilians, they were soldiers, probably wearing armor. Behind him, the woman struggled to her feet. Her breathing uneven but determined. Derek barely had time to process this before she grabbed a discarded blade from the ground and threw it with surprising accuracy. The knife whistled through the air and embedded itself in the throat of the nearest attacker. Derek let out a low whistle. Not bad. She bared her teeth in something that might have been a grin if she weren't half dead. You fight loud, she said between ragged breaths. Yeah, well, I wasn't planning on company, Derek replied, firing again as another enemy tried to circle around them. But they were being pushed back. The hunters were relentless, moving fast despite the rain, their glowing eyes locked onto their target. Derek was starting to understand. They weren't here for him. They're here for you, he realized, glancing back at the woman. She didn't deny it. Instead, she grabbed onto his shoulder, using him for support as she stood. We need to go. Derek didn't argue. He pulled a flash grenade from his belt, yanked the pin, and lobbed it toward the hunters. The explosion turned the world into a blinding white haze. And in those precious seconds of confusion, Derek grabbed the woman's arm and pulled her into the storm. They ran through the rain, their footsteps splashing through puddles and debris. Derek could still hear the hunters behind them, shouting in their guttural language as they regained their bearings. But distance was on their side now. A small chance, but better than none. The woman stumbled, her injured leg slowing her down. Without thinking, Derek hooked an arm around her waist, half carrying her as they pushed forward. A plasma bolt exploded against the ground near their feet, sending up a burst of superheated steam. Derek cursed, forcing them into a sharp turn down a narrow alley. The ruins provided some cover, but the hunters were persistent. They had tracking equipment, probably. Genetic scanners. They wouldn't stop until they found their target. They won't stop, the woman gasped, confirming Derek's thoughts. Derek's mind raced. If they kept running, they'd eventually be caught. The woman was too injured to maintain this pace. And Derek was starting to feel the strain too. They needed A new plan. Spotting an old transport tunnel ahead, Derek pulled her toward it. The entrance was partially collapsed, but there was just enough room for them to squeeze through. He shoved her inside just as another shot grazed past them, close enough that Derek felt the heat on his skin. He spun around, firing blindly behind him to keep the hunters back, then ducked into the tunnel after her. The tunnel was dark, damp, and reeked of old fuel and decay. Water dripped from the ceiling, and somewhere in the distance, Derek could hear the sound of running water. But it was shelter, and right now, that was all they needed. The woman collapsed against the wall, clutching her side. Blood was seeping through her bandages again, and her breathing was becoming more labored. "You didn't have to help me," she managed, her voice tight with pain. Derek checked his rifle's power cell, less than half charge remaining. "Yeah, well, I have a habit of making bad decisions." She let out a weak chuckle, shaking her head. "Why?" It was a simple question, but Derek didn't have a simple answer. Why had he helped her? Why was he risking his life for someone who should have been his enemy? Footsteps echoed outside the tunnel. The hunters were close, too close. Derek met the woman's gaze. Golden eyes that held a mixture of pain, gratitude, and something else. Determination, maybe. Or resignation. "Got one more fight in you?" Derek asked. The woman exhaled slowly, wiping blood from her mouth. Her golden eyes met his with something fierce and unbreakable. Always. The storm had passed, leaving behind a heavy silence that seemed to press down on the ruins like a weight. Outside the tunnel, the city stretched endlessly beneath a sky still streaked with smoke. No sounds of pursuit, no signs of life. Just emptiness. Derek sat against the rough concrete wall, his rifle balanced on his knee, his breath finally evening out after the chaos of their escape. His body ached, a collection of bruises, cuts, and exhaustion that weighed him down like a lead blanket. But he'd felt worse before. Much worse. Across from him, the woman wasn't faring nearly as well. She was slumped against the wall, her breathing slow and shallow. The fight had taken more out of her than she wanted to admit, and Derek could see the toll it was taking. Blood had seeped through the makeshift bandages on her ribs, creating a dark stain against the fabric. Her silver hair clung to her damp forehead, and her blue skin, usually so vibrant, looked dull and pale in the flickering light of the small fire Derek had managed to build. She was dying, slowly but surely, and they both knew it. "You're still bleeding," Derek said, watching her closely. The woman, he really needed to learn her name, let out a weak, breathless chuckle. Her golden eyes barely cracked open. "You have an annoying habit of stating the obvious." Derek shook, his head and shifted closer. "Let me see." She tensed as he reached for her, muscles coiling like she expected an attack. Even half dead, she was still on edge, still ready to fight. It was almost admirable. Almost. "You can either let me help or you can bleed out," Derek said, his voice even. "Your choice, princess." She scowled at the nickname but didn't argue. That was progress, Derek supposed. Carefully, Derek peeled back the blood-soaked bandage, grimacing at what he found underneath. The wound was deep. Too deep for a simple field dressing to fix. It wasn't actively gushing anymore, but she'd already lost too much blood. If infection set in, or if they had to run again before she had time to recover, she wouldn't last another day. "This is going to hurt," Derek warned, pulling out a small medical injector from his pack. The woman smirked weakly. "You keep saying that. It never stops being true," Derek replied, preparing the injector. "Try not to pass out." He pressed the device against her ribs, and the wound hissed as the clotting agent and painkillers seeped into her system. The woman sucked in a sharp breath, her claws digging deep grooves into the stone floor. But she didn't cry out. She just clenched her jaw and endured it. "Damn," Derek muttered, half impressed. "You really don't like showing weakness, do you?" She let out a slow breath, the worst of the pain subsiding as the medication took effect. "Weakness gets you killed." Derek didn't disagree. He knew that lesson well enough. Silence settled between them as Derek finished dressing the wound. When he finally pulled away, she let her head rest against the wall, her breathing coming a little easier now. "You going to tell me why they want you dead?" Derek asked after a long pause. The woman's golden eyes flickered open, studying him with an unreadable expression. For a moment, Derek thought she wouldn't answer. Then, finally, she sighed. "I wasn't supposed to survive." Derek frowned. Not exactly an answer. She let out a dry, bitter laugh. "No, I suppose it isn't." She was quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting to the small fire crackling between them. "My people don't abandon their own. Not unless they think they're already dead." A pause. "Or unless they want them to be." Derek caught the weight in her words, the edge of something raw and painful that she was trying to hide. "You were military," he guessed. "Once," she admitted. "A long time ago." Derek studied her carefully. There was a story here, something that explained why Zack hunters were tracking her through the ruins of a dead city. What happened? The woman, he really needed to ask her name, exhaled slowly, as if debating whether or not to tell him. "My team was sent on a mission. Something classified. Dangerous. We were ordered to retrieve something valuable, or destroy it if necessary." She paused, something dark flickering in her expression. "It doesn't matter now." "Something went wrong," Derek said. It wasn't a question. "Something went wrong," she agreed. "Or maybe it went exactly as planned. Just not for us." Derek didn't push, just waited. In his experience, people told you what they wanted to tell you in their own time. Pushing usually just made them clam up. "My people," she said finally. "We believe in duty, in sacrifice. If a mission requires us to die for the greater cause, we don't question it." Another pause. "But I did." Derek raised an eyebrow. "And that got you a death sentence?" She gave him a wry, humorless smile. "Apparently." Derek leaned back, letting her words settle. He'd seen enough betrayals in his time to recognize one when he heard it. The kind that came from the people you trusted most. The kind that turned loyalty into a liability. "You don't look surprised." She observed. Derek shrugged. "Not my first time seeing someone get screwed over by their own side." She studied him with those golden eyes, something shifting in her expression. "You don't talk like a soldier." "Not anymore," Derek said simply. That seemed to satisfy her. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling softly between them. The space felt smaller somehow, the distance between them charged with something unspoken. Not just tension, something else. Something neither of them was ready to name. "What's your name?" Derek asked eventually. She looked at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether to trust him with even that small piece of information. "Velia," she said finally. "Derek," he replied. "Derek," she repeated, testing the sound of it. Human names are strange. Zack names aren't exactly normal either, Derek pointed out. Velia almost smiled at that. Almost. Then they heard it. Footsteps. Above them. Slow, careful, but unmistakably there. Derek went rigid, his hand moving instinctively to his rifle. Velia tensed too, her own hand moving toward the knife at her belt. The footsteps were faint, distant, but getting closer. This wasn't the clumsy shuffle of scavengers or the heavy boots of human patrols. These were Zach's footsteps, light, precise, deliberate. More hunters, Derek whispered. Velia shook her head, her golden eyes wide with something that might have been fear. Worse. Derek barely had time to process that before a shadow moved at the tunnel entrance. A flash of motion, a low, guttural growl that made the hair on the back of Derek's neck stand up. Velia shoved herself upright, ignoring the pain in her ribs, just as the figure lunged. Derek moved without thinking, raising his rifle, but the attacker was too fast. A blade arced toward Velia's throat, and Derek stepped into its path. Pain exploded through his side as the knife sliced deep, tearing through his jacket and biting into flesh. Derek felt the warm wetness of blood spreading across his shirt, but he didn't stop moving. He couldn't stop moving. Velia's eyes went wide as she saw the blood, saw Derek stumbling but still fighting. Something changed in her expression then. Something fierce and protective that Derek had never seen before. And that's when he realized this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about something much more dangerous. This was about trust. Went wide, Derek. Derek gritted his teeth and drove his fist into the attacker's jaw, sending the warrior stumbling back, blood soaked into his shirt, warm and spreading. But he ignored it. He fired again. The shot striking true this time, the Zeret collapsed moving. Silence. Viola stared at him, her golden eyes wide, breath unsteady. You, Derek exhaled sharply, pressing a hand to his bleeding side. I'm fine. Villa's expression tightened. No, you're not. She moved quickly, kneeling beside him, her hands hovering over the wound. He could feel the heat of her skin, the irritants in her touch. You idiot, she muttered, voice low. You didn't have to do that. Derek smirked despite the pain. Yeah, I did. Her jaw clenched. She looked away, something flickering across her face, a mething raw and unguarded. When she looked back, her expression had softened just slightly. She didn't speak, didn't thank him, but her hands moved, pressing against his wound, applying pressure. He let her for the first time. She didn't push him away for the first time. He didn't want to leave. The space between them was small, now smaller than before. Derek let out a slow breath, thought of exhaustion settling over him. Valia was still watching him, golden eyes flickering with something unreadable. She didn't move away, neither did he. The fire had burned low, its last embers casting faint, flickering light against the rough tunnel walls the storm had long pasted. But the damp chill remained, sinking into Derek's skin, mixing with the dull throbbing pain of his wound. He could feel the warmth of dried blood clinging to his side, the bandage tight against his skin. It hurt, but he had been through worse. Across from him, Velia sat with her back against the wall, arms wrapped around her knees. She hadn't spoken much since she had patched him up, but he could feel the weight of her gaze on him. It was sharp, calculating, as if she was still trying to make sense of what had happened, as if she were trying to make sense of him. Derek exhaled, shifting slightly, and immediately regretted it as a fresh wave of pain pulsed through his ribs. V's golden eyes narrowed. You're an idiot, Derek let out a tired smirk. You've mentioned that you know me. Her voice was quiet, but there was something beneath it, something raw. You shouldn't have done that. Derek tilted his head against the cold stone. And yet I did. Her expression darkened. He sighed, rolling his shoulders. I don't know, princess. Maybe I have a habit of making bad decisions. Villa's jaw clenched. That's not an answer. Derek studied her for a long moment. She looked furious, but not in the way he expected. This wasn't the anger of someone insulted or annoyed. This was something deeper, something like fear. It clicked. Then she wasn't just angry. Backhouse. He had risked himself. She was angry because she hadn't been prepared for it. You're not used to people sticking around, are you? Da, said his voice. Quieter now. Velia flinched just slightly, but it was enough. She looked away, staring at the fire as If it might give her something to say, Derek let the silence stretch between them, giving her the time she needed. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. I was never meant to make it out, she admitted back then. My team, our mission was never about survival. We were meant to complete the objective, no matter the cause. Derek exhaled, and you lived. Velia's lips pressed into a thin line. Yes, not by choice. She hesitated, then finally she shook her head. Derek didn't push further, he could see it, the weight of whatever had happened, whatever choices had been made. He didn't need the details to understand what it meant. So when I took the hit for you, Derek said, watching her reaction, her jaw tightened. It was stupid, Derek smirked. You're welcome. Her golden eyes snapped to his sharp and frustrated, or not getting it. She let out a harsh breath, her claws flexing against her knees. You don't just throw yourself between a blade and someone you barely know. That's not logical, he arched a brow, worried about logic now. Valia glared. I don't need you protecting me. Mick's gaze softened, his smirk fading. I know. She frowned at him as if she wasn't expecting that answer. But I did it anyway, he continued. Not because I think you're weak, not because I think you need saving, but because I made a choice. He held her gaze steady and unyielding. Because you're not just someone to leave behind. I's breath hitched just barely for a moment. Neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly, its dying light casting shadows across the narrow space between them. Then V moved slowly, cautiously. She shifted closer, her body tense, as if she wasn't sure whether she wanted to fight or give in. Derek didn't move, didn't reach for her. He let her come to him, her fingers brushed against this arm, light but deliberate. It wasn't the first time they had touched, but this was different. This wasn't necessity, this wasn't survival, this was choice. Derek swallowed, his pulse thrumming just a little too hard. You're touching me. Velia's lips twitched, observant despite the teasing grammar. Her touch lingered, her fingers tracing the edge of the bandages over his wound. He could feel the warmth of her skin, the way her claws barely grazed his arm. It sent a slow, smoldering heat through him, something more dangerous than the pain in his ribs. I don't understand you, she murmured, her voice quieter now. Derek huffed a small laugh. You're not the first. She shook her head, her expression unreadable then, before she could talk herself out of it, before either of them could think too much. She closed the distance, her lips brushed against his hesitant onset. But there. Derek inhaled sharply. He hadn't expected this, not yet, not from her. But the second he felt her, the second she pressed just a little closer, instinct took over. His good hand came up, fingers grazing the side of her jaw, tilting her face just slightly as he deepened the kiss. Velia let out a soft sound, something caught between surprise and surrender. Her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt, anchoring herself to him. The heat between them built slowly, steadily, like an ember-catching flame. Alia pulled back just enough to breathe, her forehead resting against his. Her breath was warm, her golden eyes half-lighted, still unreadably but softer now. Derek swallowed hard, his grip on her tightening slightly. So waste that a thank you kiss, or... Vela exhaled sharply. But this time it wasn't frustration. It was something closer to amusement. Shut up, Derek, she muttered, hesmirked. No, she didn't move away, neither did he. The fire had long since died, leaving the tunnel in complete darkness. Derek lay awake, his back pressed against cold stone, listening to Vea's steady breathing beside him. She had finally fallen asleep, her exhaustion outweighing her stubbornness. He should have been asleep too. They both needed the rest. But his mind wouldn't stop turning. He could still feel the ghost of her lips against his, the way she had let herself be closer to him, the way she had let down her guard. If only for a moment it had been reckless, unexpected, but real. And now reality was clawing its way back in, because this couldn't last. They were still hunted, still trapped in the ruins of a dead city, surrounded by enemies. Wouldn't stop until they were both nothing more than bodies in the dirt, and worse. Derek wasn't sure if he could save her this time. A faint vibration rumbled through the ground beneath him. His instincts went razor sharp in an instant. That wasn't the wind, that was movement. Sat up carefully, reaching for his rifle, eyes adjusting to the pitch-black surroundings. His pulse pounded in highs they had. Found them a second later. Velia stirred, even injured, even half asleep. She sensed it too. Her golden eyes snapped open, sharp and alert. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The tension in her body mirrored his. Then the first explosion hit the tunnel. Shook violently, sending dust and loose debris crashing from the ceiling. Derek barely had time to roll to his feet before a second explosion ripped through the entrance, flooding the space with bright, blinding fire. The horse knocked him backward, and for a split second he was weightless, airborne before his back slammed against the stone. Full pain, sharp and immediate, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. Through thrumming in his ears, he heard shouting Zerrit hunters. They were moving fast there. Silhouettes cutting through the smoke and fire, weapons drawn. They weren't here to take prisoners. Velia was already moving, her knife flashing in the dim light as she threw herself at the first attacker. Derek forced himself up, ignoring the way his body screamed in protest, and fired his rifle, one down than another. The tunnel was collapsing around them. They had seconds before they were buried alive. Velia spun, slicing through another enemy's throat, her movements fluid. Despite her injuries, she wasn't just fighting, she was desperate, because she knew the same thing he did. This wasn't an ambush. This was an execution. Another explosion roared, and the ground beneath them gave way. Derek barely had time to register the drop before he was falling. The world tilted, his body twisting in midair as the floor beneath them crumbled into a deeper level of the ruins. He hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact. His rifle skidded out of reach above Lee, landed wrong, her body twisting as she struck the debris. A sharp pain sound escaped her lips before she collapsed motionless. No, Derek forced himself up despite the fire in his ribs, stumbling toward her, dust and smoke clouded the air, making it impossible to see how far they had fallen. The tunnel above was completely caved in. There was no way back up. Velia, he rasped, dropping to his knees beside her. His hands moved instinctively, searching for wounds. She groaned, her eyes fluttering open. Still here, she muttered weakly. Relief surged through him, sharp and unexpected. He exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That they weren't safe yet. A low, mechanical hum echoed through the chamber, cutting through the dust. Philadelphia. Derek froze. No, 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 no. Her recognized that sound as it. Shock trooper, armored, heavily armed, almost unstoppable. And they were trapped. Velia heard it too, despite the pain. Desperate blood smeared across her skin. She tensed, golden eyes flashing. You need Tauren. Derek let out a dry, humorless laugh. That's not happening. The hum grew louder. The trooper was moving closer. They had seconds. Velia grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in. Derek, I'm not leaving you. His voice was steady, final. Her jaw clenched. He could see the war in her expression. Part of her that was screaming at him to go to save himself. But he wasn't going anywhere. A shadow moved in the smoke, a massive figure taller than any normal Zerrit soldier, black armor, a glowing visor. Derek moved first. He grabbed his last grenade and threw it as hard as he could. The explosion lit up the chamber, sending shrapnel and dust flying. It wouldn't kill the trooper, but it would buy them time. Move. Derek grabbed Velia, pulling her up. Despite the way she gasped in pain, she didn't argue. She ramped. Tunnel was unstable, chunks of ceiling still collapsing from the earlier blasts. Derek sprinted, his breath ragged his ribs. Burning. The shock trooper wasn't far behind. Then a dead-end. Derek skidded to a stop, cursing in under his breath. They were trapped against a broken section of wall, a sheer drop into darkness below. Velia turned, panting. The trooper was coming. They had one chance. Derek met her gaze. Trust me. Velia's breath caught. Then she nodded without another word. Derek grabbed her and jumped. The world rushed past them, the wind howling as they fell into Thebes. For a moment there was nothing. Just weightlessness. Just the sensation of falling with no idea where they would land, and then impact. Darkness swallowed them both, nor that was the first thing. Derek felt a stark contrast to the cold, yielding darkness that had swallowed them in the fall. His body arced, his ribs screaming in protest as sensation returned. His thoughts were sluggish, his mind caught somewhere between wakefulness. Then the second sensation, a touch, soft, warm, grounding fingers, brushed against his cheek, tentative yet firm, as if testing whether he was still there. Derek inhaled sharply, his senses sharpening up the realization that he wasn't alone. Veli, his eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, adjusting to the dim flickering light that barely illuminated their surroundings. The walls were rough metal and stone, remnants of some long-forgotten Zorit outpost buried beneath ruins of faint artificial glow. From an old emergency panel painted everything in hues of deep orange and shadowy blue. And right in front of him, Vea. She was kneeling beside him, her silver-white hair tangled, her golden eyes sharp but wary. There was dust streak across her blue skin, a fresh gash along her temple leaned. Her breathing was uneven, but she was alive. Derek exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. These fingers lingered against his cheek for a second longer, before she pulled back, her expression unreadable. "You're awake," Derek let out a low, pained chuckle. "You sound surprised." Vela arched a brow, considering we just fell at least 50 feet and nearly got buried alive. "I'd say I had my doubts," Derek smirked, shifting slightly. "Bad idea." Pain shot through his side, sharp enough to steal his breath. He let out a strained hiss, gritting his teeth. Valia's expression darkened. "You're not dead." Derek muttered, "That's what counts, right?" She didn't look convinced. "Can you move?" "Oh, one way to find out." With a groan he forced himself upright, every muscle in his body protesting. Vela's hands hovered near him, ready to catch him if he collapsed. But it didn't help. She knew better. If he couldn't stand on his own, they were already dead. He managed to steady himself, exhaling sharply. "See," Valia snorted. "You're an idiot." "Yeah, but I'm an idiot who's still standing." She rolled her eyes, but didn't argue. Instead, she turned her attention toward the collapsed ceiling above them. "The trooper is gone. Either it got crushed in the cave-in, or it decided we weren't worth the trouble." Derek frowned. "I don't like either of those options." Vela glanced at him. "We need Tomov." Derek nodded, glancing around. The only path forward was a narrow tunnel that sloped upward, their only shot at reaching the surface. As they moved, silence stretched between them. Not the tense kind they had once shared, but something else. Something settled. Finally Vela spoke. "You didn't have to do that." Derek glanced at her. "Do what?" She stopped walking and turned to face him. "Jump, risk yourself for me." Derek sighed. "We're really doing this now?" "Yes," she said simply. He studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. "I did it because I wanted to." Velia's jaw tightened. "That's not an answer." Derek exhaled slowly. "You ever think that maybe I don't want to watch the people I care about die?" Her breath hitched just slightly. Derek saw the flicker of emotion cross her face before she quickly buried it, but he had seen it. Her voice was quieter when she spoke again. "Would you have done it for anyone?" Derek didn't hesitate. No silence. The air between them felt heavier, now charged with something unspoken. Valia inhaled slowly, as if steadying herself. Then, in a movement so subtle yet deliberate, she stepped closer. Not much, just enough Vave could feel her warmth, a faint brush of her fingertips against his hand. It was a silent choice. Derek swallowed. Vela, she cut him off by kissing him, not hesitant this time, no tonsure. Certain, her hands curled into the fabric of his jacket, pulling him closer, and Dirk responded instinctively, one hand sliding around her waist while the other cued the back of her neck. Fingers dangling in silver-white hair, she melted into him, her body pressing against his like she had stopped thinking and just let herself feel. Derek deepened the kiss, letting himself sink into the warmth of her, into the realization that this wasn't just survival anymore. When they finally pulled apart, their breaths were uneven, their foreheads resting together. Derek's smirked voice lower now. "Was that a thank you kiss?" Or Villia let out a soft breathy laugh, shaking her head. "Shut up, see." He grinned, noted the moment lingered between them, before Vea stepped back, gaining her composure. "Come on," she murmured. "We're almost out." Derek nodded, falling into step beside her. Their hands brushed this time another Of them moved away, they climbed finally, after what felt like an eternity. They emerged. Dawn had begun to break over the ruins, painting the sky in hues of deep violet and pale gold. The air was crisp and fresh, a sharp contrast to the suffocating dust and debris below. Vala closed her eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply. A moment of peace. Derek watched her, something tightening in his chest. They had made it. But it wasn't over. Far in the distance, beyond the wreckage of the battlefield, he saw movement. Ships, human and Xeric, both. Voya followed his gaze, her expression hardened. They won't stop. Derek nodded, ignoring a pause, then she turned to him, her golden eyes fierce. We keep moving. Derek smirked. Where to, princess? She glanced toward the sky, toward the endless stars above them. Anywhere but here. Derek reached for her hand. She took it, and together they walked toward whatever came next, toward freedom, toward something more.